Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Kia ora, shalom, alanwa, salam. Welcome. Welcome to the meeting. So glad to see you here. Glad you come. I'd just like to do some housekeeping duties before we start. So the toilets are through that door and off to the left if you need to use those facilities. And if there's an emergency, you can see the exit signs there, but basically it's to go out that door if there's a fire emergency and head out to where the grass is, so the parking lot and then onto the grass. That's the assembly point for any emergencies. I'd just like to read a couple of verses out of Chronicles before we start, and then I'll pray, and then Tony's going to come up and speak to us. Our speaker is Tony Khan. He's the president of New Zealand Friends of Israel. I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say. So this is Chronicles chapter 6, verses 5 and 6. Since the day, this is God speaking, since the day that I brought my people out of the land of Egypt, I have chosen no city from any tribe of Israel in which to build a house, that my name might be there. Nor did I choose any man to be a ruler over my people Israel. Yet I have chosen Jerusalem, that my name may be there. And I have chosen David to be over my people Israel. Heavenly Father, we pray and ask your blessing upon this meeting, this time together. We pray your blessing upon Tony as he would speak to us. We pray that we would have open hearts and open minds to hear what he has to say, and that we might take it on board as we go forward here in our lives. And so we just pray and ask these things, Heavenly Father, in the name of our Lord Jesus. Amen. Tony?
Excuse me. Well, folks, thanks. Welcome. Thanks for coming out this afternoon. This is a special day in many respects. A lot of people may not know that tonight is Purim. Purim is the celebration or the memorial of Haman's loss in trying to decimate or remove the Jewish people from Persia. And so that brings a lot of significance and poignance to this particular day and October 7. Second thing that you should think about for today is Shabbat Shalom. Today is Shabbat. And so this is the day that all Jews remember the creation of the world. And that has significance in terms of October 7 too, because God loved all of the world so that his son could come and save us all. That includes Israel's enemies. And so that's why Shabbat takes significant meaning on a day like today as well. So the greeting for Purim is Hag Purim Sameach, if you're thinking about learning a little bit of Hebrew. And there's a lot of advantage in learning that Hebrew. When we have Israeli travellers travel through our home and they open the Bible, the New Testament, it usually only takes about 3 or 4 minutes, and then they say, a Jewish person wrote this, didn't they? And it's just from the word patterns, just the way things are said, that is. Now, I have a friend, his name is Gilad Zuckerman. He's he's the professor of revivalist languages at Adelaide University. He said to me, Tony, a language is not just the meaning of words and syntax. A language captures the thinking, the worldview, the heart thoughts of a people. You lose the language, you lose the people. And so, if you want to really understand the scriptures, then learn Hebrew. And I'll tell you this: we have a Jewish professor of geriatric medicine in Christchurch. And he said, one of the best things you can do to beat back dementia is to learn a new language. Oh, he also said, cut out all your dairy foods. And he also said, and you can listen to music, but don't listen to any of that pop stuff. It has to be classical. So there's that. So I want to thank you for coming out. There's an afternoon tea afterwards, and I really appreciate you having heard me. So you might be thinking, gosh, this sounds like the end. Well, there is a reason for that, and that is because there's a Jewish saying, which is that the saying goodbyes takes longer than the actual event itself. So I thought I'd get the goodbyes sorted out now so that we'll finish on time. Okay, So this afternoon, what we're going to do is we're going to cover quickly what happened on October 7, what impact it has had on Israel, and what impact it has had on New Zealand. And then we're going to cover why, as New Zealanders or as believers, that we should even care about this situation at all. And if we should care, and that's what I would posit, what we should do about it. Yes? So, let's begin. On October 7, an estimated 3,000 Gazans, some of them terrorist operatives, and many community members as well, breached the security fence and spread out to nearby neighbouring Israeli communities to destroy, kill, and take captives. The breach was well researched, planned, and executed over a number of years. Observation posts, surveillance systems, and IDF movements had been observed and documented. Some of the tactics observed in Syria and more latterly in the Russian-Ukrainian war had been adapted, such as the use of commercial off-the-shelf drones. They went beyond just killing and taking captives. Eyewitness and victim accounts of rape, mutilation, torture, and immolation suggest a savagery that is difficult for Western and Kiwi minds to comprehend. Let me take you on a quick trip, a quick survey of the communities that were attacked. Please, Jack. Okay. This is like a flyover. I'm not seeing it on the back screen, so I'll just have a look back this way. Okay, this is a flyover of the massacre regions. We're not going to show you any graphic images. I'm not going to traumatize you like that, right? But just take it to know that the red dots are people who died and the location of where they died. I'll start with the Nova Festival. Well, yes, I will start with the Nova Festival. The Supernova Psytrance Music Festival, held at an outdoor site near Kibbutz Re'im, located 5 kilometres from the Gaza border because of it became one of the earliest targets of Hamas terrorists. 6:30 a.m., a barrage of rockets fired from Gaza transformed what was a celebration of friends, love, and infinite freedom into a horrific massacre. By 7 a.m., dozens of armed Hamas terrorists had surrounded the festival area, firing upon the festival goers as they desperately tried to flee across the open fields. Some attendees sought cover inside bushes and pits or disguised themselves with sand, playing dead to avoid detection. Hamas methodically combed the fields, targeting the festival goers with live ammunition and rocket-propelled grenades. Hamas also hurled grenades into bomb shelters where people were seeking safety. Accounts from survivors and Zakar emergency response teams revealed appalling acts by the terrorists, including the rape of women beside the bodies of the deceased, ambushes on vehicles attempting to leave, and the forcible abduction of individuals to Gaza. The aftermath of this festival massacre was devastating. At least 369 civilians murdered, with hundreds more injured and dozens taken as hostages. Can we go through to the Be'eri massacre, please? 99 people were killed here. 20 were kidnapped. Even before the barrage of rockets from Gaza signalled the brutal surprise attack on Israel, WhatsApp messages and CCTV footage revealed that Hamas terrorists had infiltrated Kibbutz Be'eri, a small agricultural community near the Gaza Strip, before 6 a.m. The initial victims were civilians fatally shot inside a vehicle on the street. Subsequently, Hamas terrorists arriving on motorbikes commenced a horrific massacre at the kibbutz. They executed residents, utilised oil bombs to set houses on fire, forcibly entered homes, and tortured their occupants, and slaughtered entire families, including young children and the elderly. The aftermath exposed scenes of brutality. Approximately 80% of the recovered bodies bore signs of torture. The massacre resulted in the death of over 85 community members, with some being kidnapped and taken to Gaza. I won't go into any more communities because it's just too tough. But as you can see, as Jack keeps slowly clicking through each community, the story is repeated in ghastly detail, community after community, until we are back at the beginning. The deaths and horror stories have galvanized Israel to declare war. When they entered Gaza itself, I'm trying the clicker here. Can you click through for me, Jack? Here we go. Israel always knew that there were tunnels would feature in this battle for Gaza. But when you have boots on the ground, then you start to see what the real problem is that you're facing. And the true extent of the tunnel system was far, far beyond what even they imagined. Click. Next slide, please, Jack. This is a map of the London Underground. There's 180 kilometres of it. Next slide. This is a map of the New York Underground. And there's 400 kilometres of it. This is a map of Gaza's metro. And there's 720 kilometres of it. Hamas brags that they've spent billions of dollars building this network of tunnels to wage war. You know from what everybody says about Gaza that it's only a small area. It's smaller than the size of, well, it's so small, it's basically the same size as Christchurch. It's not huge. I mean, all of Israel is slightly smaller than Canterbury, right? So think about that. So that means that if there's 720 kilometres of tunnels, then can we have the next slide, please? Then how many residential blocks don't have tunnels under them? Hardly any at all. And so you're hearing reports of soldiers fighting with somebody and they can see the person through their sights and they're only half a block away. And then as they approach and they start putting some covering fire down, the person ducks their head down. But strangely, as they approach where the person ducked their head down, the person suddenly appears a block and a half down the road and he's shooting back. No, he didn't run down the street. It's the tunnels. So what you're seeing in Gaza is an inversion of all the normal things that we would expect in war. In fact, Hamas has a knack of inverting everything. So a residential block is no longer a residential block. It's actually battlefield cover. Civilians aren't civilians. They're shields. Even the UN isn't just an independent organisation that we all look up to expect to maintain peace in the world. It becomes an extension of Hamas itself because so many of its staff members are actually active Hamas operatives. And a few of them have even have gleefully recorded themselves carrying out the October 7 attack. The UN is currently carrying out an investigation of its own organisation because they're deeply concerned that their independence has been compromised, right? Because Gaza is such a small community, because everybody lives cheek by jowl, there's a lot of blending between Hamas and the civilian population, between children and adults. Do you see? And it makes it very hard for us to be able to understand the normal rules of war and what's happening in Gaza. You know, I've had a person in my home who was the leader of a small platoon. They had to go into some tunnels. As they go down, they have one lead person who goes point. He's got a special headgear that gives him some advantage in the darkness. And he's got a rifle and he's got a scope on it. Edo was telling me that as they were going down, his front man put his fist up, and then they stopped and he watched. And then the point man, what was he seeing down his scope? And we're talking, and this is the 2014 war. We're not talking about this war now, but it just gives you an idea of how war is conducted in Gaza. He saw a young girl running down the tunnel straight towards him. Through the scope, he could see that as she was running, her jacket would flip open here and there, and he could see that she had an explosive vest on her thing. And she was running at him, sprinting, you know, and you know, the 80 metres turned to 60 metres, and he had the dilemma. The dilemma was, what do I do? I've got all my comrades standing right behind me. If I let her come too close and they activate the bomb, then everybody goes. And so he had to pull the trigger. After he pulled the trigger, they had to take him out of the line, and he spent a month in a mental hospital dealing with the trauma of having killed an 8-year-old girl. You know, so you see the blending of civilians and children and adults and men and women, combatants, non-combatants. It's a very, very tricky kind of situation here. And when you think about that, there's 720 kilometres of tunnels, and you think about what does it mean to have to fight in those kinds of things. It's like going back to Vietnam War or going back to the Japanese and all their tunnels. You know, it's dark, they're long, power's been cut off. There's no fans, no ventilation. In some places, you're going to need oxygen bottles to be able to fight in it. If someone is down the other end of a particular corridor and you're a third of the way down, there's no way you can, if someone starts opening fire, you can't duck to the left or duck to the right. Your only cover is to fall flat to the ground. They know that, so they'll spray everything. And the bullets will be ricocheting all the way down the tunnel. You have to be very brave. They're trying drones and all that kind of stuff, but it's all experimental. This is in our era, drones are a new thing. Yeah. So there's a lot going on in there. This is not going to be a quick campaign. Even now, there are still rockets coming from the northern region, and theoretically, that's largely been subdued. So you have to be very careful about what's going on because there's so much conflicting information. And so what's the cliche about war? The first casualty of war is the truth. So that means as we watch what's happening on TV New Zealand or 3 Now, you know, I was about to say 3 Now may not be around for much longer, but you have to be sceptical and you have to watch carefully what's being said. So with all these tunnels, next slide please, you can then understand, Here we go. Isn't technology wonderful when it works? You'll see pictures like this, they're highly emotive. And what this is the result of a 2,000-pound bomb, right? What have we learned from the hostages that have been returned already? They tell us that the tunnels are nearly 40-odd feet deep, right? And we've already established that there is, that there's virtually no residential block that doesn't have a tunnel under it. So Israel is experimenting with different ways to try and fight this battle. And a 2,000-pound bomb is designed to get down to that 50 feet, right? Fortunately, Israel is one of the most humane armies in the world, right? They drop pamphlets letting people know that they're about to bomb a building. No other army in the world does that, right? If you want to see what real devastation is like, go to Aleppo. See how the Russians do it. It's like Stalingrad, It's complete devastation. And civilian casualties are humongous, right? In comparison to what we're seeing here. Another impact that's happened in New Zealand is a number of vigils that have been happening. I don't know whether there's been a vigil in Palmerston North, but there have been definitely vigils in Auckland, in Wellington, Christchurch and Dunedin. Pardon? And Paraparam, yep. Fantastic. It's great to hear. And so New Zealand, the New Zealand public in general, who aren't interested in Israel at all, all they see is what's happening on the news. So the vigils are a visual way for people to be able to start to realise, hey, there's something else going on here other than Israel trying to oppress the Gazans, and that it's just a war against children. These are the slogans that are being pushed out. At the same time, there have been marches from the pro-Palestinian side, and we've seen them in Parliament. We've seen them up in Auckland. There's one weekly one in Christchurch. Brian Tamaki's Destiny Church decided that they were going to front up to them head on. So in Christchurch, the pro-Palestinian vigil is at the Bridge of Remembrance as well, but it's on a Saturday. But because it's Shabbat for the Canterbury Hebrew congregation, we have ours on a Sunday. Fortunately, that's great, because it's also meant that there hasn't been direct confrontation between the two. But people who have been to both say to me there's a huge difference between the cultures of the two vigils. One is loud, intimidating, bordering on violence, with loads of anti-Semitic chants, not just, from the river to the sea. But also, G the Jews, K the Jews, F the Jews, stuff like that. And then when you get to the Christchurch vigil, it's somber. There's moments of silence. There's the song "Bring Them Home" from a well-known musical. There's poetry read out. There's people giving their testimonies about their family, their cousins, their uncles, their aunties, their grandparents who have been abducted, and they want them home. They want them home. And not just in New Zealand either. Overseas, there have been huge marches on both sides. Trafalgar Square has been completely covered with pro-Palestinian protesters. This is outside Capitol Hill, and these are all pro-Israel supporters. So don't always feel that it's a minority that support Israel. There's a huge number of people who support Israel around the world too. And even in London, there was a very big one for Israel. But you've heard it said that through your news, and virtually every bulletin has a child in it. Have you noticed? And it's filled with headlines like this: "Children in Gaza are bearing the brunt of the violence, say Save the Children president." Photos: Israel's war on Gaza's children. And that comes from Reuters. The United Nations even says 10 weeks of hell for children in Gaza, and that's from the leader of UNICEF. Or a graveyard for children, says the UN chief on the death toll in Gaza, right? And this is very much a theme. They're pushing it. Equally, there's been another wave of anti-Semitism that's gone around the world. And when I pointed out to a policeman that this person had just yelled out in his hearing that G the Jews, F the Jews, and K the Jews, he said, "What do you want me to do? I'd have to arrest all of them. It's everywhere now, you know. And if I arrest them, I'm also risking further harm to more people." So, to me, good policing would be to let it ride. I understand where he's coming from, but nonetheless, only a year ago, if someone had said that in front of a policeman, there'd be charges. Things have changed. So, what's the impact on New Zealand? I'm not going to show this video. You can go and see it yourself. It's Sean Plunkett on the platform. He's giving his response only a short 4 minutes from walking across town, having seen the 47-minute video of Bearing Witness. It's a compilation of all the phone footage that the Gazans took as they took pleasure in carrying out those awful deeds that I mentioned, and I don't even want to repeat them. But watch it. See how it sickens him. See how it makes him draw his breath. One of the things that he talks about is, he said, the brutality and the horror of it is bad enough. But then when you're listening to them laugh, bragging with one another, the sheer glee and joy in the way that they go about doing it, there's something gone wrong with humanity. I talked before about children and how children has been pushed front and centre. But have you thought about the fact that there are a number of other conflicts in the world at the moment? The Myanmar Civil War, the Sudanese Civil War that's flared up again, the Russo-Ukrainian War. Each of those, did children die in those? And in over 90% of the coverage of them, do you see a child being pushed in front of the camera? No. So that should make you a little bit sceptical. What's going on here? You see, Hamas is using the children for propaganda purposes. If you have a look at this picture, for example, in this picture here, they've pushed aside the medical technician so that they can film the child suffering. And if you watch carefully at some of the footage, even on television today, especially within a hospital, remember the time when they were really going gangbusters on Israel invading hospitals and things like that. You'll see young Israeli men running from one patient to another with their phones in hand. They're chasing stories for children. Then they realise that they can manipulate our emotions by pushing these stories in front of us. So again, be sceptical, right? Be sceptical of what you see on the news. For us, on our Facebook page, we and in other channels like our website, and also we repost articles that we think are informative. But you can take comfort in the fact that we've vetted them. We've looked to make sure that at least 5 or 6 mainstream media outlets are also verifying what's happened. We also check to see if in the article that because it's a war zone. And Israel isn't letting any journalists be embedded amongst their people, right? So a lot of people don't realise that Al Jazeera and CNN and others can't hire their own people and bring them into Gaza. So where are these news stories coming from? They're coming from Gazan citizens who have put themselves forward as contractors, contract journalists, right? And they sell their stories to the mainstream media, right? And Israeli intelligence has identified that nearly 15 to 20% are known Hamas active operatives. So, have to be sceptical again, right? In times of war, no matter what conflict, even if it wasn't Israel, you ought to be sceptical and be guarded about what conclusions you take from different things and see what is verifiable, right? It's just a good skill to have, particularly in this era that we're in the 21st century, where news can come from anywhere and everywhere, and anybody can set up a website. So be sceptical, be careful, be cautious, don't jump to conclusions. And so, this particular Palestinian march is in Auckland, in Queen Street. And this is, I've skipped 2, have I? Yep, here we go, back here. Okay, here is the march under the Bridge of Remembrance. So the bridge, that shadow you're actually seeing is the noonday sun on the Bridge of Remembrance last Sunday. So people are coming out. They're trying to show their support for both sides. But unfortunately, another impact in New Zealand is anti-Semitism, and so the Christchurch Hebrew Congregation Synagogue has been attacked a number of times, vandalism, and so the impact on that is that the congregation is quite fearful, and they've started weekly self-defence classes, and it's really sad to see 60-year-olds taking part in these classes, 70-year-olds taking part, geriatric women. Why? This is terrible. As a New Zealander, I feel ashamed. I had a call from an elderly lady in Whanganui. She said to me, "Tony, I have a cake stall down at the Riverside Market. The pro-Palestinian supporters have set up their weekly protest next to my stall. And the things that they're saying, the violence that they're trying to almost incite, the intimidation that it creates, I'm shaking uncontrollably. And as I'm thinking about it, and I have to put my cup of tea down, I can't hold a cup of tea in my hand. I think about it brings back all the stories of my parents and my grandparents about Eastern Europe and what happened to me there. And I'm starting to realise I've got intergenerational PTSD. She said, "What can I do? Tony, what can I do?" Us elderly women in the Whanganui Jewish community, we're coaching each other on how to hide our Jewishness. I got called, I don't know why from Whanganui again, but I got a call from a Christian shopkeeper, and he put up an Israeli flag outside his shop as a sign of solidarity, and he got vandalised. In Christchurch, I've had people, members of the Jewish community, come to me and join our meetings. And they said, all our lives, and this lady's only 48, 49, she said, we've been taught not to trust people who aren't Jews. We've been taught to be circumspect. We've been taught to keep our Jewishness quiet. But Tony, I'm at this meeting and I can see that there are non-Jews who love us, who support us. And she burst into tears. She said, "I never knew." It's difficult stuff. Another thing that's happened is that not only is the Jewish community fearful, but some parts of the Jewish community, particularly the Israeli immigrants, are saying we're not going to take this lying down. We're going to speak up. And so members of the Jewish community have approached the billboard sign vendors and organised to get time on those electronic billboards. The one on the right is on the main South Road in Christchurch. The one on the left is in Wellington. And this is the billboard that we showed on January the 19th when one of the babies that was abducted turned 1. So, what are the root causes to this thing? It's important to know the root causes because during the Christchurch vigils, people come up to us and they yell out, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," right? And we ask them, we don't yell back or anything like that. We go, "Tell us about what that means. What river is it?" And you'll be surprised what kinds of answers I get. I've heard the Nile. I've heard the Euphrates. When I asked what sea it was, one person said the Indian Ocean. Another person said the Red Sea. We've gone through so many people since October the 7th now that we figure about 2/3 of the people who yell that out actually don't know what it means. And then when you open up a map and you show them what river it is, the Jordan, and the Mediterranean, and then we say to them, "Okay, so now you know which river and now you know what sea. What's in between?" They go, "Oh, Israel." So did you mean that Israel has to be destroyed or disestablished so that Palestinians will be free? They go, "Oh, I need to rethink this, don't I?" And that's 2/3. And most of them are younger people, under 25, So this is a big part of what's going on here, that people are just jumping on the bandwagon. They're seeing the emotion of the news coverage, the children and things like that, and it's only a natural thing for people who are looking for justice to back the underdog. And they do, without even knowing what it is. So what we know is that a lot of these people who are supporting the pro-Palestinians don't know. We need to be the opposite of that. We do need to know, right? If you want justice, what do you need? You need evidence, facts, good, hard evidence. And the discussion and debate will work out what's the soft evidence and what's the hard evidence, yes? But to have that discussion and debate without evidence, how are you ever going to get justice? I don't blame these people wanting justice. I can understand it. It's a universal value, right? But we need to get everybody to a place where we can discuss and debate. But you can't discuss and debate if you don't know. So that's why we're going to cover some root causes. Can you read that? Fantastic. Guess what? I can't read the one at the back there. So, the Ottoman Empire, right, lost World War I in 1914 to 18. They ruled all of the area that is now modern Israel and the West Bank and Jerusalem and Syria and Lebanon and Iraq. In the aftermath of that war, a lot of those states that we just talked about came into being for the first time, right? So, and there was no country called Palestine. And there wasn't even an ethnic group that saw themselves as Palestinians, right? And if he had to use the phrase Palestinian back in those days, they would have included Jews, right? So have a think about that. Then the League of Nations came along, and as part of that carve-up, they said to the British, you have a mandate to sort things out in this area that would have been traditionally Judea, Samaria, and the works. In 1947, because they had the Arabs and the Jews both unhappy, and the Arabs were particularly not prepared to accept any kind of division of the land, the Brits said, too hard. We're smack in the middle, we're the meat in the sandwich. The Jews hate us, the Arabs hate us. It's too hard. Hand it back to the League of Nations. The League of Nations go, yep, fine, we'll put it onto the successor organisation, which is the United Nations. And the United Nations came up with a partition plan, right? And said, hey, you can have a state, Palestinian state, Israel state. What happens? The Israelis go, we got nothing, we'll accept the plan. The Arabs go, not in your life. In fact, this is going to be a winner takes all, fight to the death. Right? So effectively, by accepting the plan, the Israelis were saying, we're prepared to give coexistence a shot. The Arabs said, not on your life. Right? And they said, we're going to have a winner takes all, fight to the death. And they have been dying, and they've been causing death and mayhem since. So the Israelis rejected it. And what happened? This is the headline. Arab fury loosed on Jewish state. The Jewish state was only a few days old. And not only that, most of the people there were still convalescing from the deprivation that they'd faced in the camps in Europe. And the miracle of it all is they still won. So this is the nub of it, right? The core of the problem. You've got two indigenous peoples, tanga whenua, right? Lived there for hundreds, if not thousands of years. One accepts the partition plan, effectively opting for coexistence. The other rejects the partition plan and opts for winner takes all, fight to the death. If anybody asks you what's the core of this, this is the core of it. A simple idea like that, right? Coexistence is off the table for the Arabs. So, Israel successfully defends their fledgling nation despite the costs. They do it 2 more times in 1967 and 1973. And by odds, I'm talking about all the neighbouring countries ganging up and invading, right? Taking on all your neighbours. Over the years, Israel has become a diverse, modern, liberal democracy. It's got one of the strongest economies in the area. It provides a lot of trade and employment to the region now. People are copying the way that they run their economy. And the neighbouring countries know it too. And quite a number of them are quite frustrated with the Palestinians because they keep saying no to peace. And yet they keep coming out with the bigger bowl. But they can see Israel is prospering and they want to trade with them. So that was the fertilizer for the Abrahamic Accords later on, right? Because people, even the Arabs are starting to get sick of it. It is now a jewel in the Middle East. The Palestinians, over the years, have been offered statehood 3 times, rejected all of them. They have had more foreign aid than the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe out of World War II. And now that you know about the tunnels and everything else, you know where the money went, right? It didn't go towards the prosperity and welfare of, well, a portion of it did, but a minor portion. The bulk of it went towards waging war. And by doing that, you make your people destitute. You put them in harm's way. without a choice. Have you ever wondered why Russians are poor? Did you know that the size of the economy is only the size of Italy's economy? And yet, they seem like a superpower. Why? Because they put all that money into their armed forces and leave their people destitute. There's a parallel there. See what I'm getting at? Totalitarian regimes doing this to their people. The other place where the money goes is not just into war, not just a small proportion of it going into aid and into actual welfare. A huge amount of it goes towards graft. Yasser Arafat didn't die poor. He died with tens of millions of dollars in the bank. He never ran a business except one, the grievance industry, right? And they've also invested in education, but not education as we know it. This is education to indoctrinate people to hate, to be given a new history, right? So a big part of being able to move an entire people is to tell them a story that makes them feel that they're being threatened and they have to act in order to defend themselves. Hitler did it. These guys are doing it. And so there are reports of IDF soldiers getting into schools and seeing what kinds of pictures the little kids are being asked to draw. You know, little stick figures with people with guns shooting Israelis. You know, if you look on their maps, there isn't an Israel there. Only Palestine. They're being fed right from the day that they start going to school. There is no Israel. Israel's stolen our land. We have to get it back. Right? And it's a whole generation and a half that have been fed this. Right? It's deeply, deeply ingrained. When I was talking to one Israeli soldier from 2014, he said, you know, you try to clear out the civilian buildings, but some people won't leave because they believe it's their duty to be sacrificed. It's their duty to be martyrs. You see what I'm getting at? What we're talking about here is a society that a lot of how we think is foreign. That the divisions that we think of are blurred, that the ideas of what is life and how you should value it are gone, right? They've been brought up in jihad. And in jihad, the other people must be destroyed or converted, one or the other. It's death or conversion. That's it. And that means that you're prepared to sacrifice anything and everything to get there. And that's what you're seeing with Hamas. Okay, so why are there Palestinian refugees at all? You'd think that because they're ethnically Arab, that the neighbouring Arab countries would, you know, these new countries that were created in the aftermath of the Ottoman Empire would take them in. Well, they tried. Except when the Palestinians were in larger numbers in Jordan, they fermented a rebellion, so they got kicked out. They ended up in Lebanon, and they fermented a civil war, and they got kicked out. Hamas gets its roots and its origins from the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is also a jihadist organisation in Egypt. And they've tried to foment rebellion and assassinations in Egypt a number of times because they don't like democracy. And so they've been outlawed a number of times and brought back and thought to be rehabilitated and then outlawed again, and the pattern goes on. And so Egyptians don't want the Palestinians either, because then they would strengthen Muslim Brotherhood and then, you know, we could have trouble again. And so all the neighbouring countries don't want them either. Incidentally, each of these countries do have a small number of Palestinian refugees, but even after 40, 50 years, they won't give them full citizenship in their countries. It's terrible, isn't it? You can't, you know, these guys, you've got to feel for them too. that they are living in the twilight zone. You can't go backwards, can't go forwards. You can understand the despondency of Palestinian youth. Because these guys are basically the pawns in Hamas's religious war. How are we doing for time? Okay, so why is UNRWA controversial? The usual agency for refugees, for any refugee, except Palestinians, is the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. Their job is to take refugees, vet them, make sure that they're legitimate refugees, and then a number of countries all over the world have signed up to a treaty that will take a quota of them every year and resettle them. And that's a great humanitarian welfare-ish thing to do. Why? Because it takes them out of the twilight zone, brings them to a place where they can start a new life and they can live and become. UNRWA, which stands for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East. The Palestinians have their very own refugee agency. And in the first year or two, the idea was that this would just be a temporary organisation. Every 3 years, the UN votes to whether or not to reinstate it. And clearly, they've reinstated it every time, right? But the idea was it was going to be a temporary agency. These guys would get resettled because there were so many of them. And then UNRWA would disappear and the Palestinians would get on with their lives. Didn't happen. The Palestinians refused to be resettled. And I've seen the minutes of the president of UNRWA at the time going, I can't resettle these guys because they won't move. They won't do it willingly. And I'm not prepared to take force against them. So all of a sudden, over the years, this has become a permanent organisation. It's become institutionalised. And not only that, they hire Gazan citizens, like the news agencies, they hire Gazan citizens to do their work. Unfortunately, quite a percentage of them are also active Hamas operatives. And a significant amount of the aid that comes channeling through UNRWA ends up in the tunnels, ends up under a hospital to feed the army that sits underneath, right? Russian television interviewed Hamas and said, you've started this war. What do you say about the welfare of the citizens? And the answer was, oh no, our job here is just to wage war. The responsibility for the safety and the welfare of the civilians is on Israel and on the UN. How twisted, upside down that is. And this is going to be a recurring theme throughout this whole sorry saga, as everything gets tipped over. Like I was saying before, civilians aren't civilians, they're shields. You know, residential homes aren't residential homes. They're actually battlefield cover. So it goes on. This means that over the years, UNRWA has now become so institutionalised, actually the people who work in it, they know if it closes down, they've lost their jobs. And so it becomes a self-perpetuating system, right? No other people in the world get their own, very own refugee agency. It's so weird, right? This is the reason why Israel and others, including us, we've written to Winston Peters and said, hey, you know, you should be advocating for UNRWA to be dissolved. Let UNHCR, which has the correct goals and objectives to resettle these guys, get them out of the twilight zone, give them a chance to have a life. Give them a chance to be able to establish lives, get jobs, have babies, let their kids go to university, live and become. So, what's it all based on? You may not know, but in the 30s and 40s, the Arabs had a lot to do with the Nazis, and they taught them a lot about propaganda. And the philosophy behind it can be found in, if I keep myself in sync with what I've got in front of me, Mein Kampf, Hitler's magnus opus. and it's called The Big Lie. Have you heard of it? This is what he says in Mein Kampf. Bear with me. In The Big Lie, there's always a certain force of credibility. Because the broad masses of a nation are always more easily corrupted in the deepest strata of their emotional nature than consciously or voluntarily, and thus, in the primitive simplicity of their minds, you can always hear his contempt. They more readily fall victims to the big lie than the small lie. Since they themselves often tell small lies in little matters, but would be ashamed to resort to large-scale falsehoods. It would never come into their heads to fabricate colossal untruths, and they would not believe others could have the impudence to distort the truth so infamously. Even though the facts which prove this to be so may be brought clearly to their minds, they will still doubt and waver and will continue to think there may be some other explanation. For the grossly impudent lie always leaves traces behind it, even after it has been nailed down, a fact which is known to all expert liars in the world and to all who conspire together in the art of lying. Has anybody read C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters? Sounds a bit like that, doesn't it? And so the big lie shows its face. So this is the hospital that got bombed earlier on in the war. And straight away there was an announcement that 500 people had died. It took us nearly 3 days in Christchurch before we could even tell you how many had died in the mosque. So heaven knows how they were able to count all these bodies so quickly on the same day that the bomb went off. And of course, the numbers came from who? The Gaza Health Ministry, or Ministry of Health. Who runs the Gaza Health Ministry? Correct. So, when we accept their numbers and accept what they say, it's like the animal that jumped on the back of the crocodile or the fox and swam over the river with it. Do you remember that story, that fable? Yeah. It doesn't end well for the little animal. So October the 17th, this explosion happened. Social media erupts immediately with rumour, false reports, misinformation and disinformation. October 17, same day, Guardian blames Israel for the attack, and the New York Times says an Israeli airstrike kills 500. Where do they get their news from? Same source, Gaza Health Ministry. October 18th, the day after, BBC speculates that it's difficult to believe that it is anything other than an Israeli air attack. October 19th, the number gets revised. It's now 471 dead, 342 injured. October 19th, the US intelligence services say that between 100 and 300 died, not 500. October 22nd, the American Friends of the Episcopal Church of Jerusalem says something like 200 died. We don't believe that is any more than that. October 23, BBC apologises for speculating about who caused the explosion. October 23, same day, New York Times apologises for relying too heavily on Hamas claims and should have declared that these claims were unverified. October 25, Le Monde, the French newspaper, publishes apology for insufficient caution, noting that news is difficult to verify in a battle zone and that Hamas controls the Gaza Health Authority. October 26, Washington Post says a 155mm artillery shell caused the explosion and therefore it must be Israel. November the 3rd, Le Monde also says explosion caused by 155mm caliber munition, but it was an illumination shell from the IDF, because if it was a real one, there'd be way more damage than what you're seeing in the photo. There wouldn't be cars there, for a start. November 26th, right? So this happened October the 17th, so we're well over a month afterwards now. Human Rights Watch says the ratio of dead to wounded seems unusually high and inconsistent with the damage observed on site. they conclude that the cause was a misfired rocket from all the evidence that they've gathered, including Al Jazeera's footage, because they were filming Gaza right at the moment when the explosion happened, and they watched an explosion, a rocket take off, do a U-turn and come back down again. At the very moment that the explosion happened in the car park. Straight after that, November 26th, social media about the explosion. Quiet, gone, moved on. Up until then, it was a continuing cacophony. Many of you will have seen this map. Have you seen it before? Seen it tons of times, isn't it? It's used as a key piece of evidence to justify that the land that is in dispute has been stolen from the Palestinians. So the map on the left, all the yellow, what they're saying there is, that is Palestine. See, that's us. That's our country. And it's the first one, and everything else is based on it. So we might as well only just talk about the first one on the left. Was there a Palestinian country there in 1946, 1947, 1948? No. Was there any Palestinian country before 1946? No. Never was. Never has been. Right? It's a fiction. The basis of this whole thing, this myth that's been indoctrinated into all Palestinians for the last generation and a half, is based on that lie. And they believe it. And it's not just believed by the Palestinians. I have a friend who worked in the airline industry in Saudi Arabia, in a jet engine maintenance facility. He had a map. He brought a map when he arrived, put the map up on the wall so that he could keep track of all the parts that he was ordering from all over the world. Right? He got into trouble with his employers, his Saudi employers. Why? Because his map was printed in the UK. And what's slap bang in the Middle East? Israel. Every map in Saudi Arabia has Palestine in it. So you can understand in the Muslim world why they think that they've been sold the same lie. And it's been around for so long, they've just accepted it. This is just as bad as China's 9-dash line. You know, it's a figment. So, Hamas, Mickey Mouse teaches jihad. This is how deeply it runs, right? So keep this in mind when we're talking about these things, because this is going to influence the way this war ends and how it will be conducted after the conflict is over, right? This stuff will shape what has to happen when we've won the peace, when we've won the war, and now we have to win the peace. Do you understand? And one of the other causes, I mentioned it before, that there's a blending of things, that UN assets are being used for military uses. Hospitals, mosques, schools, they keep munitions in them because they know that under the Geneva Convention, Israel, who will observe the convention, will refrain from shooting them, refrain from bombing them, right? It only bombs them when there's clear evidence. Because under the Geneva Convention, if you use a hospital and put arms and munitions in them, it is no longer immune. Right? You've just turned it into part of the battlefield. Right? You won't be able to bring a war crimes charge. Well, you could, but you won't win it in the ICJ for that if there's clear evidence. And Israel makes sure it keeps its evidence because they know then they're going to get accused later, right? Now, what is this graph? Who's into mathematics? This is for you, right? All you engineers out there, all you mathematicians, you know, who likes doing Sudoku? Now, this is a graph. This is a graph of Is there a laser pointer on this? Jack? Okay, I'm about to find out how it works. Okay, here, this is the total of daily deaths according to Hamas's health ministry, which you all know is very sceptical, dodgy, right? 26th of October, right? So remember, it happened on the 7th of October. So this is the 26th of October, and you can see the bar graph there, and it's sitting somewhere just over 7,000. Then this is November the 10th. Now, what do you see about that graph? What makes you think it's dodgy? It's a flat line. Exactly. If you were going to make it up, wouldn't you do a better job? Wouldn't you do a better job? And yet, when you listen to Biden or you listen to our man in Washington at the moment from TV New Zealand or whatever, what do they say? 30,000. 30,000 people have died. What should you be thinking about as soon as you hear a number like that? Skeptical. Don't know whether I can believe that. Not only that, I can tell you that the 30,000, Hamas doesn't, the Gaza Health Ministry doesn't differentiate, doesn't break that number down for you. They won't tell you how many are combatants and non-combatants. They're all thrown in together, right? But they will tell you how many women and how many children. Why? Because they're trying to promote the war against children, right? So you need ammunition, you need facts to try and make the big lie work. This is a graph of the daily deaths during the same period of time. This is the woman on the left-hand axis. And this is the daily children, right? Now, you know the surge and ebb of a war, don't you? And so that means that as activity goes up, you'd expect that women and children the numbers would increase too. And as the battle ebbs, that should come down, right? So you should also think that there should be quite a high correlation, talking maths now, high correlation between women and children. So when there's more women dying, should be more children dying. True? So that means that if I'll explain this to you for all those non-mathematicians. If what I'm saying is true, you should be seeing kind of like a sausage going low down here and high up here, right? What do you see? It's all over the place, right? So if you're going to make up the numbers, you should do a better job. They're not being very good big liars. But that's only with a bit of scrutiny. If you don't scrutinise it, and if you combine it with the photos of the children and everything else, it makes for a very good big lie. And the world is being carried along with it, right? Equally, this is another graph. This is the daily counts, the same numbers from before, but this is the daily men. And this is the daily women, right? Remember the surges, the ebbs and flows of battle, right? What do you expect again? You expect another sausage. Low down here, high up here, kind of a cloud that should be like that. But remarkably, when more women are killed, less men are killed. In fact, almost none. And equally, when there's hardly any women being killed, there's buckets of men being killed. It is so counterintuitive, it's not funny. It's not real. It's lies, right? This all comes from a professor of mathematics from Wharton Business School in the University of Pennsylvania, right? He did this maths, and he said to him, it took him all of about 10 minutes to make these graphs, right? Scrutiny, thinking about things, right? So why should we care? Let's start with a secular reason. Israel shares many of our values as a liberal Western democracy at the ends of the earth, right? They value freedom of speech. They value freedom of association. They value freedom of religion. They have a free press corps. Look how, if you only have to go onto Haaretz or something like that, and you'll see how critical the articles are there. Nobody's going around stomping them out, shutting them down. There's equal opportunity for women and any ethnic or religious group. There are Arabs in the Knesset. There's an Arab party. And for a while there, Netanyahu even managed a coalition with an Arab party in it, right? There are Arabs on the judiciary. There are Arab university lecturers. There are Arab scientists. There are Arabs fighting in the IDF, Army, Navy, or Air Force, right? There are Arabs in the police forces. Every month, one of them dies protecting the rest of Israel from terrorists in civilian streets. These Arabs are Muslims. They're not converted Jews. 20% of Israel is made up of Arabs. What percentage of the West Bank and Gaza is Jewish? Bugger all, excuse me. Hardly any. Democracy, the rule of law, the separation of powers, such as an independent judiciary. That's what this law reform controversy is all about. Pluralism and tolerance, reason and progress. Politics is about compromise because you're trying to represent all, right? It's right there in the middle of the Middle East. It's a jewel, it's a light. Oh, does that sound like a metaphor that you might have come from a book that goes on many, many, many thousands of years? But these values are under fire, right? And they're not just under fire in Israel or the Middle East. They're actually under fire across the whole of the world, right? Has anybody heard, put your hand up if you don't know what critical race theory is. You all know what critical race is? You guys are an incredibly educated people. Critical race theory, the upshot of it is that all the woes of the world are due to Caucasian white people. In the end, that's what it's concluding, right? As if white people are the only people that have done anything wrong. Well, I'm Chinese. I can tell you we've killed a few millions. Actually, several hundred million, you know. Do you know what settler colonialism is? Yeah, it's about the colonialism that happened in, in the 19th, or going back into the 16th, 17th, and 18th, 19th centuries, and that all people of colour have effectively come out the wrong end of that whole process, right? And so, again, put that together with critical race theory, another white thing. What is wokeism? Wokeism started out as being something quite a good thing, but it's now become a bad thing. Tell me, when you meet a woke, what characteristics do you get? Sing out.
Amazing tolerance.
That's right, I spot it. It's humour.
That's right.
It just ran right in front of me. Yes. Yeah, it's intolerance. It's no attention span. It's speak to the hand as soon as it is, Evidence means nothing. Oh, no. And not only that, if you try to come up with any evidence, pretty soon it just devolves into name-calling, ad hominem attacks. Do you know what I mean? Hey, the famous boomer statement that was said in Parliament. Do you know what I'm talking about? No? Chloe Swarbrick. She had to debate someone who was about 20 years older than her. She couldn't come up with a decent argument, so just said, oh, you're just a boomer, and dismissed them. Right? But that's what happens. It's this new younger generation. Sorry for all you younger generations that you might end up being plastered with the same reputation. But it's a bit like that. You hear young people and they're not interested in discussion and debate. It's basically my way or the highway. And you try to talk and they go, no, not interested, but they'll say it in different ways. And it's dismissive, right? It's terrible because, as I said before, we're in the 21st century, We're in human civilization, we are the most well-educated humanity there is, right? Information is at our fingertips like no other generation ever has had it in the history of all creation. Right? So, and we've all been taught, the scientific method at school, So why don't we apply it in normal life? Why do we jump to conclusions so quick? What have we done to our children that they think that this is the way to deal with life? We need to fight against it, because these three trends are having an impact on the Israel-Gaza war and the future of Israel. It's actually having and when you think about it, it's having an effect on us, and it's creating a country that's forming itself on racial divide, and it shouldn't be, right? We need to work out ways that we can live flexibly with one another, that can accommodate each other's cultural aspects, and still be unified by common ground. We need to understand what it means to be a New Zealander just as much as a Jew, just as much as someone from the UK with a British heritage, or someone from China, right? I was in an airline lounge speaking to a Samoan comedian. He said to me, "Tony, how do you live?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I'm always juggling my Samoan culture with my Kiwi culture. It's tough." I said to him, "Well, maybe you should stop juggling." Because it's what? Have anybody tried juggling before? It's really stressful, If you're not concentrating, your ball hits the ground, But I said to him, you just need to be able to hold the balls in your hand and become comfortable with both. Then you can be a New Zealander, and you can be Chinese or Samoan or British, and you can hold your heritage high and be proud of it without needing to divide a country. See where I'm getting at? And we need to be able to find systems and ways that we can flex and do things, but not create institutions that are totally just for one culture and just for another culture and things like that. If we do that, we're going to start creating a voluntary apartheid, right? This is part of what needs to happen in the Middle East too, because globalization means there's a lot more flow and movement of people around, and that means that we need to learn how to get on with one another and still be able to accept each other's differences. That flexibility. In engineering terms, there's another analogy, and that is, back in the 30s and 40s, the ergonomics of a cockpit in an aircraft were quite fixed. And some controls were out of reach when you needed them desperately quickly in an emergency, things like that. And they started thinking the systems were wrong and all that kind of stuff. But all the controls were put there based on averages. The average arm length, the average leaning distance, right? But when they started measuring actual real pilots, they discovered a huge diversity, and a lot of the things that you really needed at your fingertips couldn't be reached. So how did cockpits change? Cockpits changed by everything becoming adjustable. So when you sit down in a jet as a pilot, you can adjust the seat for your leg length. You can adjust the joystick and things like that. Do you see what I'm getting at? Analogously, we as a society and in the Middle East need to learn how to create that kind of flexibility to adjust to those differences without making it so that you have to build a completely new aircraft every time, right? Sorry, it sounds like I'm preaching. Oh, I'm in the church. Maybe I'm in the right place. And bear with me if you're not a Christian or if you're not involved in Christianity much at all, because what I'm going to talk about now will have a lot of relevance to Christians and to Jews, right? But if you notice, this picture is symbolic of the dividing wall in Romans. What does Paul say about the dividing wall? It's meant to be gone, but it isn't. In real life, we have very little to do with any Jews, and they have very little to do with us. And in my experience, when you don't have a lot of contact with one another, then you have an absence or a vacuum of information. And what do humans do when you get a vacuum of information? You fill it with something. What do you fill it with? Speculation and conjecture. Exactly, rubbish, right? And so, for example, one of the things that I do in New Zealand Friends of Israel is I organise Ask Me Anything sessions, right? AMA on the internet. And so I'll invite a rabbi and I'll go, are you prepared to do this? He goes, ooh, sounds like I'm sticking my head in the lion's den, into the lion's mouth. I go, oh, no, not really. We'll cook you first. Thing is that he, and to give them credit, they all have said yes, right? They've all said yes. And then he said to me, what do Christians think of us? I said, oh, they believe that you follow a legalistic religion and that it's all tradition and you don't follow any of it, heart, mind and soul. He said, how can that be? I said, why? He said, first commandment says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind and soul. And if you're not even doing the first commandment, what's the use of the rest? It's a waste. So how can you believe that of us? I said, well, that's what happens when you're far apart and stories take on momentums of their own. There might be a little grain of salt somewhere in there, but then you can look at within Christianity, there are many people who do things out of tradition and not from the heart, mind and soul. Mendel came to an Ask Me Anything session. Joanna will know Mendel Goldstein. I see you, Joanna, there. Good to see you. And his question, and often people ask me questions, and sometimes this one was like a grenade. It landed in my lap. I thought, how many seconds is it going to go before it blows up? He said to me, oh, Tony, I hear you're a Christian. I suppose you're going to try and convert me. I think, gosh, I've only picked you up from the airport 3 minutes ago, and already you're asking me a tough one. And I thought, oh, what am I going to say? So I just said to him, Mendel, why don't we just start with the idea that we both worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Why don't we start there and see where that takes us? He's dressed like this Orthodox Jew here, with his wide-brimmed hat, and he looked down at the ground. All I could see was the bottom of his beard. I thought, oh no, here we go. Then he looks up with a smile and a glint in his eye, and he said, I can work with that. And away he came. So he came to the Ask Me Anything session, and then he said, and then people started firing questions about the Torah, left, right, and centre. And he started answering them, bang, bang, bang. Oh, yes, blah, 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 no problem. Yeah, great, this is what it is, And people were fascinated, absolutely fascinated. Afterwards, he was totally jovial. I said to him, oh, you look very happy, Mendel. I thought you'd be tired out after an hour of asking questions like that, It's like an interrogation. We did everything except put a torch on his face. Anyway, he said, oh, isn't it wonderful? Isn't it wonderful? Every day in, day out, I have to teach little kids their bar mitzvah information and their bat mitzvah information, and they're there only because they have to be. But here I'm filled with this crowd of 150 people, and they're interested in the Torah. You can tell from the questions. They're passionate about finding the truth. They want to know. Isn't it a joy to be able to do that? And so then he sat down at the piano and started playing all this Eastern European music and singing away, while we were having our afternoon tea. It's marvellous. It's marvellous. You can see why the scriptures talk about in Zechariah that we're going to want to grab hold of the hem of the garment of a Jew, because we hear that God is with you, right? Just one thought. So, I met a rabbi who had studied the New Testament all his life. Amazingly, he hadn't converted. I thought, And so I said to him, that must be fascinating. What do you think out of all that study? He said, from my contact with Christians and the literature that I've seen, I think you guys have misunderstood Paul. I said, why do you say that? He said, what does Paul mean when he says that you're grafted in? What is he trying to say when he says that you should call Abraham your father? What is he trying to say when there is one body, one spirit? You're called to one hope, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God, the Father of all. Echad for a Hebrew person. You know what echad means? That's the Hebrew word for one, right? And remember, Shema, do you know what the Shema is? Have you heard of what the Shema is? Hear, O Israel, the Lord is one. So the word one, echad, has special meaning, you see. Perhaps you Christians are Jews, but you don't know it. And, there was one thing I missed out. He said, what do you think he's trying to say when he says that the spirit of adoption has brought you near? You're part of the family. And that's when he said, I think you guys are Jews, but you don't know it. Deep. And something that's deep always makes me happy. So I said to him, but I don't feel like a Jew. He said, I don't mean taking on all our cultural and historical baggage that we've collected along the way or through the 1,000 years. But tell me, can you call yourself a Jew if you do not love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul? And I was thinking to myself, oh my goodness, he's talking about being saved by faith. Oh, there's a paper-thin veil between us in the way that we think. See? I had a lady come and join us for Shabbat. In our family, we celebrate Shabbat on a Friday night. And we're Christians, but we do it anyway because we read that somewhere that the Catholic Church had turned it into Sunday, and we thought, well, why shouldn't we go back to the Saturday if that's what the Bible says? Because it's only tradition that's made it Sunday. So then we thought, okay, we'll do that. And we thought, well, we adopted a little bit of the Jewish liturgy because we thought, well, rather than reinvent the wheel, we'll do that and say a prayer and light a candle, and that helps to give us a bit of framework and focus for the children. So that was okay. Anyway, we got a call from this lady in Christchurch about, and she has the only kosher kitchen in Christchurch, right? What do you know what the components of a kosher kitchen are? You're not allowed, according to the scriptures, you're not allowed to cook meat in its mother's milk, right? So the way that they deal with that is to say, okay, we'll make sure that that milk is never with meat, right? So they have two kitchens, one for dairy, one for non-dairy. Cool. Because she's got the only kosher kitchen in Christchurch, she has about 45 people turn up at her house every week to celebrate Shabbat. So she rang us. She said, "Oh, Tony, I've had a hell of a week. I can't face 40 or 50 people this week. Can I come and celebrate Shabbat with you on one condition?" I said, "Oh, what's that condition?" She said, "Don't tell anybody. If you tell anybody, they'll all turn up." So I said, "Fine." So she came and we did Shabbat together. And of course, as part of that, you may or not realise that the first 5 books of the Bible are divided into 54 parts by Orthodox Jews all over the world. It means that, and every week it's been allocated to each week of the year, and it also means that everybody's expected to read it. It also means that when you get to Shabbat, it means that everybody's read it, and one of the traditions of Shabbat is to discuss the Bible at the dinner table, right? And so they do. And if you meet Jews, they are quite robust in the way that they discuss things, right? And so we had quite a discussion. That was great. Afterwards, she said to me, "Tony, you guys think like us. You talk like us. Why aren't we together more? And why are we together? Why are you so similar to us?" I said, "Well, we both worship the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. We both hold the same scriptures to be sacred. We both believe that the commandments of God are righteous and we should follow them. Why shouldn't there be convergence?" So she followed up the next question with, "So why aren't we more together?" You may well ask, the dividing wall. We have to do things to start breaking down this dividing wall, right? God shows us the way so often in the Bible, doesn't he? He tells us, he goes, "I'll give this to you." Then you have to go and get it. It's the same. The dividing wall's been created. You have to grasp it. You have to take it on. When you do, then you'll start to see that actually we are a part of the same family by that spirit of adoption. And therefore, What are the defining things that make you, or make anybody, a Jew? Remember Abraham. Was he Jewish by blood, ethnicity? No. What does Hebrews say? By faith. That's right. It's not about ethnicity. It's about, well, if you like, there is one ethnicity, the Torah following, the Torah observant, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob following ethnicity. That's it. You don't have to take on all these other traditions and things like that. All you need to do is follow God and God's ways. And you'll be part of the same body, the one spirit, the one law, the one baptism. You see what I'm getting at? Does that help understand the connection between Christians and Jews? I know you don't have to agree with me. I know it's taking a lot to think about. I've heard these exposures and I've been reflecting on them for decades. So I don't feel that you're under any pressure. What can we do? What can we do? You can join a march. Start a vigil. They're not hard to create. Think about the elements that will be there. Invite people along. Think about where a good location would be, right? It helps people to be able to come together and know that there are others who want to support Israel as well, right? Don't be afraid of hecklers and things like that. We'll get to that part of the what can we do later, right? But in the scriptures, have you noticed that God exhorts Israel at least 8 or 9 times to be bold and courageous? Have you ever wondered why God would have to say it? He has to say it because you won't feel it. It's an action, it's an intention. You have to make a decision to be bold and courageous. You have to go against your feelings, right? And go and do it. That's why. It's like I said to my daughter, why do you think God put the commandments in there? She said, why? And I said, because we won't think to do them ourselves just naturally. So he puts the commandments in there to guide us on what is his ways. So another thing that you can do is, we were approached by the Embassy of Israel and they said, 249, 250, 300 hostages. It's really hard to kind of think about a big number like that. So what we want the New Zealand community to do is to adopt one family. And they want us to adopt the Bebas family. This is Yarden, 34. Cherie, 32. Ariel, 8. Kafir, 9 months old when he was abducted, now 1 year old. Now, Jack, this is the time to have a look at Kibbutz Nir Oz. Kibbutz Nir Oz, that you just saw a flash of a whole bunch of a colourful garden there. It is kind of like the nursery of the Negev, right? They create and hybridize and create lots of amazing flowers and stuff like that. They also have a fertilizer factory there. It's an agricultural hub of the Negev. It's also a bit like the West Coast. There's a lot of hippies there. And they all earnestly believe in that if we could just get more contact with Gazans, we could live in peace. If we could just have more contact with them, if they could see more of us, we would both recognise each other's humanity and there could be peace. On the morning of October the 7th, Hamas's terrorists infiltrated the kibbutz Nir Oz, ruthlessly attacking individuals out in the fields, encircling the settlement and breaching its security perimeter. Armed with extensive ammunition, assault rifles, RPGs, grenades and explosives, they launched an onslaught, decimating entire families, including the elderly and children. Residents fought desperately to keep them at bay, enduring over 10 hours without outside defence. In the aftermath, other individuals, including women, children from the Gaza Strip, looted and further vandalised homes, leaving a trail of devastation. Military personnel arrived later in the afternoon to evacuate and assist the surviving residents. Amongst the victims were an 80-year-old woman and her 13-year-old autistic granddaughter. Now, Jack, can you zoom in on the bottom half of the kibbutz? Oh, and it twisted around. Can you see? Can you see? Can you see? Can you drag it to the right so I can see more of the left? And can you drag it up a little bit? No, up means drag the whole map up. Where are you? Where are you? There we are. Thanks. Well, this is the exact place where the Bibas family was abducted. Right? Right there. And Gaza is just up here. Thanks. Let's go back to the slideshow, please. Thank you, Jack. It's located... Oh, yes, we're here. So, on the morning of October the 7th, Yarden, the husband, continuously texted his sister, Ofri, letting her know what was happening in Kibbutz Nir Oz, where he lives with his wife and their 2 boys. Then, at 6:30 a.m, he wrote about the rockets. And then he texted his sister again and said there's terrible fighting outside and there's intense pressure to try and hold off the wave of Hamas terrorists who entered Nir Oz. The terrorists ended up committing a brutal massacre and 180 people were killed. He told his sister that his little boys didn't know how to keep quiet, and he told her it felt like the end. In the video, Ofri shows closed caption TV footage of her brother's house as Hamas terrorists strolled open the front door. Yarden wrote to his sister one last message before they broke through: I love you. At 9:45 a.m, he wrote, they're in. Some 2 hours later, the family saw a video circulating of Sherry holding both boys in her arms, a look of terror on her face as she was surrounded by terrorists, her boys facing her chest, a blanket covering them. Yarden, her husband, can't be seen. Neither is Sherry's parents, Margit and her husband Yossi, who were later found dead. Eventually, the Bibas family found a video of Yarden injured with blood around his head, surrounded by terrorists. This is a photo of the grandparents. He's Argentinian, she's Peruvian. He's been in Israel for 40 years. He's a car mechanic. She is a early childhood education teacher. So since then, the extended family has been working heaven and earth to try and bring them back, bring pressure on the government to have a ceasefire and do a hostage exchange. The initial hostage exchange that you know about, that was supposed to be, the deal was that all the women and all the children were supposed to be freed, and Hamas reneged. Their excuse was that the Bibas family is in another terrorist group's hands. Israel's position is, you started this, clean it up. And on January the 18th, Kafir turned 1. And so we held a meeting in Christchurch, and we had extended family members zooming in from all over the world. And we talked to them about what was happening in New Zealand. And we talked to them about the things that we were doing and the great concern that we had. And they talked about their story about how they've been trying to campaign for their people, and they've been begging themselves, mortgaging their houses, because the survived extended family haven't had their houses broken into because they're living in other parts of Israel, to fly around the world to talk to people, to raise world awareness, to bring world pressure to bear, to bring their loved ones out, right? They really care for one another. I remember being asked about an Israeli traveller that died on the Rootburn track, right? And people were surprised that the family had mortgaged their house for a search and rescue team to come out here to join our civil defence to find them. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Well, because this is how much they care for their own. And we showed you before the billboards that we created for them. So I invite you to join us in trying to support the Bebas family. Read about them. Look them up. Later, I'm going to give you an email address to the Deputy Chief of Mission at the Wellington Embassy. She has said, give me all your letters of support. I used to work in an organisation called Sprayton Underground. We used to bring Christians who were persecuted for their faith to New Zealand. We also supported people who were persecuted for their faith who were in prison. And so we used to write letters to them in prison so that they knew that people around the world were praying and supporting them. We could do the same for the Bebas family. Yes? Write to them. Tell them about your concerns. It doesn't have to be long. You don't have to have lots of bragging rights about what you're doing and what. Just the fact that you are and you know and you're aware and you care, matters. What else can we do? We can pray. There is a Prayer for Israel group in Palmerston North. Sorry, I don't have their contact details. Someone here may already have them. Spread it around, right? Get together, pray. The power of prayer is really important. It's not like witchcraft. You're not casting a spell. But the scriptures say if you don't ask, you don't get. So ask. It's so easy. But ask. Take the time. You have a gift. It's not like a spiritual gift where kind of like, oh, I don't have the gift of healing and you don't have the gift of teaching or whatever. You have a gift that's been given to all of us, and that is your citizenship. Right? And your citizenship is far, far more than just a vote. Right? It is your voice as well. Right? It is your voice. I've met with our MPs, I've met with Megan Woods and Duncan Webb and others, and they'll say to me, Tony, for every one letter that I get that's pro-Israel, I get 100 pro-Palestinian. What is my job as an MP? I'm here to represent the electorate. And if I get 100 here and one here, what am I supposed to do? His duty, that's what he should do. We have a responsibility to speak up, to share our voice. It doesn't help that in New Zealand we don't have a strong civics program in our schools and things like that, whereas they do over in the States. But we ought to, because we need to take advantage of the gift that God has given us, which is to live in a liberal democracy where there is a freedom of speech, where there's freedom of association, where you can use these things to fight some of the things that we've talked about before, right? Each of these people are normal people. They know their job. I have a friend who thought, okay, I'll have a go at crack at becoming an MP. So he went on the National Party ticket, and he got taken on a training camp for prospective MPs. The first thing they said to him was, to the whole group actually, was, you are here because you have seen some problem in society and you want to fix it. We want you to put that out of your mind now. You are not here to do that. You are in a democracy. You are here to represent your electorate. And we're funding your campaigns, so you also need to listen to what we tell you too. But nonetheless, that was the beginning. It was an eye-opener for him. right? But it should be an eye-opener for us. They're there to represent us. Just because they're on the Labour Party or it's on the National Party and we would normally vote for the other party, it doesn't matter. They've been given the job of representing our electorate, therefore we need to hold them to their responsibility. And the only way we can do that is to act as citizens and give them our voice our opinion. Yes? So take them out for a cup of tea. It doesn't have to be scientific. Just say, I, as a New Zealander, live in a liberal democracy and I want to support another liberal democracy that looks like it's at threat in the Middle East. That's all you need to say, right? That's the language of foreign affairs, right? Finding other countries with similar common values and visions and working together. Yes? And so I've got a picture of your mayor up there. I see a picture of your electorate there, of your MP as well. Grant Smith, Tangi Utukere. Is that how you pronounce his name? Don't worry. You can contribute towards the billboard campaign. It isn't cheap, but people are reaching into their pockets and making it happen. You can wear a T-shirt, right? The King of Denmark read that the Germans were going to make all his Jewish citizens wear a yellow star. When he read that, he turned around and he said to his family and to the royal household, we are going to wear yellow stars too. Then he jumped on his horse and rode up and down the streets of Copenhagen to make his point, and people started wearing yellow stars all over the place. Denmark had one of the lowest mortality rates of Jews in World War II, right? This T-shirt, simple T-shirt, it's just got the Magen David there, the Star of David, right? It's a simple way for you to show solidarity with Israel. It's a simple way, without being like the pro-Palestinians and intimidating people and being in their face, right? But if you notice, as soon as you stand up to them and act rationally, it takes the wind out of their sails. They're expecting you to fight back, right? They want you to fight back. You don't have to fight their way, right? Oh, sorry. Unfortunately, I've given you a picture of my son too, who turns out to be 6'4". It makes me look a bit tiny. Oh, do you want to know the secret? You plant him in a planter, make him sleep upright at night and put lots of maxi crop on. The other thing you can do is join up with other community groups, not just pray for Israel and others. I mean, there's New Zealand Friends of Israel as well and things like that. There's a number of Israel support groups. It doesn't matter which one you join, just join. Gather with other people, talk about different things, right? You can support one another in that. And not only that, you'll start sharing ideas. This issue has, unlike many other issues in the world, has captivated people in New Zealand and has been really divisive. How many of you had conversations with friends, family, loved ones about this? Put your hand up. Cool. One of the things about getting together is to talk about what works and what hasn't worked. So this is an interactive part of the presentation. Tell me, what has worked for you? Is there? We were talking about a handheld mic before, Jack. Where's that? Great. Is it working? Excellent. Are you free to move away from that desk? Excellent. So have you talked to your family, friends and loved ones? Have you got a story to tell? What's worked? Or, if you like, what hasn't worked? Joanna.
Right, I'll just come over here so it's easier. Or maybe the back. Right, okay. So I'm Joanna Moss, and Tony was my boss for 17 years. I've come from Wellington, and I brought with me my friend Randa Toma. And as you can see, we are wearing the hostage bracelets. So these are bracelets that we got from the Israeli community in Wellington. So I want to tell you a little bit about our march, because each of the marches in the main cities are different. And so our hope today is that some of you will start doing something in Palmerston North, because let me tell you, those of us in Wellington who are watching the country, we are really concerned about Palmerston North. Okay? So just you hear that? We are concerned about you because there are gaps around the country. Obviously, in the main centres, we've got things going, but there are things happening in other parts too, not just the 3 or actually four cities. Right. So let's hear what's happening in Wellington quickly. It's the Israelis. Okay, the Israelis living in Wellington are running the weekly march, headed up by the leader of the Israeli community in Wellington. It's made up of Israelis, and just in the last couple of weeks, a few of the local Jews have turned up. When October the 7th happened, the Wellington Jewish community went to ground, basically. But as Tony said, the Israelis stood up and they said, we want to run a march, and then they invited me to join. At this stage, it's pretty much just the Israelis and just about 3 of us Christians who've joined, mainly because it's a Sunday morning and also because they've kind of wanted to keep it more of their expression with a few of us added to it. I talked to the leader and said, I think we need to change the route. So the route now is from Te Papa, and we run right along Oriental Bay. So we go through the Sunday market and then round the point and then to the Nancy Wake Memorial. If you remember, Nancy Wake is the Wellington Jew whose nickname was the White Mouse, La Souris Blanche, and she was the Wellington Jew who was the great resistant fighter in the French resistance in World War II. So we march to Nancy Wake. We then do our little spiel for the global solidarity movement, which I'll tell you about in a minute. And then we march back again. So why do we march around or part way through the Sunday market and then around the beach? Is because we are able to silently interact with the people. And this is a great way of people for us to gauge their reactions. So what are the reactions we find? We're holding posters, we're wearing our little bracelets. There are special T-shirts that you can wear which say bring them home. They're black with red and white writing. The thing that we find is that a lot of Kiwis look at us, well, who's kidnapped? You know, you can see that their look of puzzle on their face. We also get people saying, good on you, good on you. And last week we had 4 people who came up to us and said, good on you. Sometimes we get people who just look completely blank at us, which shows that they obviously have even probably no idea a war's going on. So you can see you've got people in different camps. We actually, one day we walked past a pro-Palestinian group, and that was pretty intense, but not too bad, because obviously we're praying, and we're praying for God's coverage and protection as we walk along. The thing that we have observed is there is actually quite a lot of support in the community. There's a lot of silent support. So the question for all of us is, how do we mobilise that? Okay, the other thing is there's a global clip that goes out every week which features groups around the world. And we have our little slogan, and it says, bring them home now, run for our lives, bring them home now, and then we say Wellington, New Zealand. And these clips then get circulated and they're to encourage around the world. There are 175 known groups on a weekly march. So, you know, Palmerston North, let's see what you can do.
That sounds great, Joanna. Thank you very much. For me, for example, when I'm discussing with somebody, I try to find out what do they know, because there's so much ignorance, and try not to say anything much myself, right? Just hear them out. What's worked for me is also then, once you know where they're at and how much they know, then you can start suggesting some things. But again, in this culture, I've found trying to convince people is a waste of time, right? Because in this wokey culture, nobody wants anybody's opinion foisted on them. So what do? So I will say to them, look, there's this and there's this and this. I don't expect you to believe me. But none of this happened under a rock. So part of learning to talk to people about this is to find phrases that work for you that effectively communicate the same sentiment that I'm telling you. None of this happened under a rock. You don't have to hear it from me. Go and read. Go down to the there's tons and tons of books written about this. History books that will address things like who owned the land back in 1946, whether there really was a Palestinian country and all those kinds of things. You can just direct them to read. And when they realise that you're not trying to convince them about anything, then all of a sudden, it takes the intensity and the pressure out of the situation. What's also worked for me is to look for common ground. I had a really angry Middle Eastern person ring me from Auckland, and because it's my phone number that's on the website, I get all the calls. And this guy was really going to town. I just listened. I went, yeah, I hear you. No, just to let him know that I'm still on the line. Eventually, he runs out of puff. And then I said to him, I appreciate your passion for justice, because he was going on about how can you kill children and all that kind of stuff, right? I said, I appreciate your passion for justice. We're looking for justice too, right? And I'm glad that you've called, because it gives us an opportunity to discuss and to share ideas and share perspectives. Because if without that, we're never going to get to peace. There was this silence on the other end of the line because he didn't expect me to say anything like that. He thought I was going to give him the stiff uppercut like he'd given me a stiff uppercut, right? So if you look for common ground, and then if you're not trying to force an opinion or force the facts on anybody, then people are so much more amenable to listening themselves, right? So I've said before that the culture of the pro-Palestinian lobby seems to be aggressive, seems to be full of victimhood, seems to be full of intimidation. You want to be the opposite. You want to be well-informed. You don't want to be ignorant. You want to be peacemaking and listening, not just shaking your fist and saying that I've got a story to tell you, buddy, You don't want to go down that path. You know that they've bought the big lie. You know that already. There's no point trying to prove that to yourself, But what you need to do is bring them to a place where they're open to listen. And that'll be the beginning of peace. I'm going to go quickly now. So look for common ground. Don't try to convince. Invite them to read widely. And then read widely yourself, right? Don't wait until you know everything before you open a conversation, because you'll learn stuff from them. And it's perfectly okay to say, I don't know the answer to that one. Let me read up on it and I'll get back to you, right? There's no shame in saying, I don't know, right? Learn. Every time you have another conversation, it'll be an opportunity for them to learn and for you to learn. And then you'll start to build bridges, right? So, reading widely. We'll give you a chance to have a look at that quickly. But listen and learn, right? Then read widely. Here's 5 books that are interesting to read. The War of Return talks about how the refugee problem has become embedded, and how a Palestinian identity has arisen after multi-generations in a refugee camp. Things like that, right? Alan Dershowitz's book is The Case for Israel. It's fantastic because it goes through, it's a little bit of slightly more drier reading, but it takes you through into the negotiations of the Oslo Accords and other things. And then to hear what went on, and suddenly, there was a Saudi prince who was talking to Yasser Arafat, who said, Ehud Barak has just given you 95% of everything that you are asking for. And you're still saying no. How can you do that? Nobody in a foreign negotiation like this ever has turned down 95%. And we know the answer why, because later on he gave a speech in South Africa to the Arabs there, and he said, "See, I haven't given up on our cause. It's all or nothing." Right? So these books, you can find them on Amazon, things like that. Noah Tishby's very readable guide to the Israel dispute is an easy read. And then for those of us who are Christians, this is a series of essays written by a Jewish theologian from Texas University, Mark Nanos. And he's writing from the position of, I wonder if Paul never actually intended to create a new religion. Maybe he was always in Judaism all along. And if we read his writings from that perspective, would it be different? And if it was different, how would the world be different? And so that's a part of it. So if you can get a chance, you can take a photo of this. This is a table of resources. Up there is let me push this laser thingy. So there's our website there. And here is the email address to support the Bebis family, the dcm@wellington.mfa.government.il, right? And you can send your letters there. The Billboard campaign bank account, Shalom 02, this is their bank account number, and just put Billboard in there, right? They're not a registered charity, so they can't give you a tax receipt. Over here is buy a t-shirt, and you can buy one of these, right? And the price is $30 each. All you have to specify is male or female, small, medium, or large, and your delivery address. When you email us, tell us where to send it. And then when you make this FPOS internet banking transfer, just where the name is, put your first initial and your surname. And in the next field, just write T-shirt. So our treasurer knows that the money's arrived. And then he'll tell me, you can go ahead and dispatch the order, right? It takes about 2 weeks. We're not carrying a lot of stock, so if volumes start to rise, well, then we will carry some stock, because otherwise it takes too long. But it's about a 2.5 week wait at the moment, all right? Join a prayer group. Contact us, and we'll put you in touch with someone in your area. There is a National Prayer for Israel organisation, and I know him well, Michael, and he's based in Dunedin. And they have an online prayer group if you can't get to it on closely. We have a 500 book library in Christchurch, right? So if you become a member, which is only $40 a year, so it's about 2/3 the price of North and South, right? Then you can become a member. If you become a member, you get library borrowing rights. At the moment, there are 88 books out. So everyone's heeding what we're saying. Read widely. And then if you know the history, then you can be secure, right? And as I said, it's online. So even if you don't join, there's a scrolling graphic that takes you through all the books. If you've got the patience to see 460 of them scroll in front of you, it's okay. But it will give you, but you can click on them. And when you click on one that you fancy, it'll give you a blurb about what it is and things. And if you really can, you can go and buy it from Amazon and pay for the postage too. But nonetheless, they'll give you reading opportunities and see. You want to read. So, just to sum up, next steps. You can adopt the Bebis family. You can join a prayer group. You can write to your MP. Or you can write to Winston Peters, who's our current Minister of Foreign Affairs. You may not know it, but his mother made him learn Hebrew. Chris Luxon, Prime Minister, also a Christian, spent his youth in Avonhead Baptist. Buy T-shirts. You can read widely. Be ready to talk to your family, friends, and loved ones, right? God is going to bring you opportunities to do that. Talk. Don't wait until you're fully prepared. Just say, what do you know? How do you think? What do you think about this? 1,300 people should not die for nothing. Fight anti-Semitism and racism wherever you are. Yes? you know? I mean, last night I had a phone call and a text message from the same person, basically saying, you guys, you deserve to be in the ovens, you know? It's utter rubbish. I'm toying with the idea of what to do with it next, because I've got the person's phone number, and I've got thanks to Spark's voicemail app on an Android phone, it transcribes the call. So I've got the word for word down, and I'm thinking, should I send that to the police or not? So these are some of the thoughts that are there. Look, I know, thanks so much for being so patient. I've covered a lot of ground. Theoretically, there should be a Q&A now, but I also know that there's 3 tablespoons full of food out there and a good hot cup of tea, and I'm ready for it. So what would you like to do? Are there any questions you'd like to ask me?
What about the Christians that are in Gaza? You didn't mention them. What's happening about them and to them?
They are suffering the same plight as other Gazan citizens, right? They're constantly searching for safety, for food, for water. Yep. If you notice, and that brings us on to aid and ceasefires, right? Israel has said, before we go into Rafah, we are going to create islands of refuge. People who want to go to have to pass through a checkpoint, because we're not going to let them take their guns with them, and then they'll have access to food, water, medical supplies, things like, and medical care. Once all the civilians who deem themselves as civilians are gone, then we're going into Rafah, you know, and weed out the rest of them. Incidentally, Hamas has said to their citizens, don't go to the islands. Why? Because their objective in this war is not to win the war in a military fashion. Theirs is to bring oxygen back to the grievance industry that they built up before October the 7th and before the Abrahamic Accords. The Abrahamic Accords and also the Russian-Ukrainian war sucked the oxygen out of their cause, and the money started drying up, right? And they've seen this for some time now, so they've actually been preparing for the last 3 years. So there's that. I know that, you know, some of the counter views that Christians will put to you will be things like, but doesn't the Bible say we should love our enemy? Doesn't the Bible say that we should turn the other cheek? I'd encourage you to read Romans 12 and 13, right? Romans 12 has a lot of those themes in Romans 12. But then in Romans 13, it starts, and it's talking very much about individuals, but in Romans 13, just 4 verses later, Paul starts talking about how governments should act, how societies should act collectively. And he talks about the role of what government is. And what is the role of government? The role of government is to protect the vulnerable. It's to punish the wrongdoer. And it's to prevent further wrongdoing to happen, right? So think about that in the wider context of what's going on here. They've started a war. They were intended to start a war. That's why you have this incursion on such a huge scale, right? And by doing that, they've given Israel no choice but to have a war, because they must prevent further wrongdoing from happening, right? If they don't defeat Hamas, then you're giving them a mandate to do it again, right? Not only that, because of what I was talking about in terms of indoctrination, think about the analogy that how long did it take the Israelites to learn not to be slaves? A whole generation. It may be that we might need to take a whole generation to learn not to hate, because you're already teaching hate at early childhood care, right? So that's what I meant by winning the peace. It doesn't seem to me very feasible not to have Israeli administration of Gaza from after the war. right? There's no choice. And then they've got to take over from UNRWA. UNRWA can't, if the UN doesn't have the appetite to disestablish UNRWA and pass the job over to the UNHCR, then Israel has to step in and do the right thing to prevent further wrongdoing, to preserve life, right? The impact on Israel, I forgot to mention this earlier, is that people, up until the age of the late 30s or even early 40s, you are still part of the reserves. From after you finish year 13, you go into the army, you're there for 3 years, you come out. One of the things that you'll want to do is come to New Zealand, because that's actually on everybody's bucket list in Israel. Come to New Zealand. In fact, they do it so often, so many thousands of Israelis come through that they actually have a series of bucket list jobs that you've got to do, and that's called the Hummus Trail. And you follow it all the way through. But that means that during a time of war like this, you get called up, right? Now, what if you're a plumber? What if you're a sole trader, grocery store owner? What if you're just a one-person consultant? What if you are part of a corporate consultant, but you don't get a salary? You only get a commission of all the work that you bring in. And then you get called up to think, but you've got 3 children, and you've got a wife, and you've got rent. What happens? It has to be paid for. Everybody's out of pocket over this. Nobody actually realises that several 100,000 people have been displaced, on the Israeli side, right? When, I've had friends, Christian friends, who have gone over there since October 7. One of the first things, and just to help, they're tradespeople, engineers, things like that, and Israelis said, "What are you doing here?" And they said, "We've just come because we knew you'd need help." Every time a coconut, they burst into tears because they think they're alone. They think if you watch the headlines, they think the whole world is against them, and that there is no righteousness to this thing from the world's point of view. How can that be? In other words, Hamas breaks the peace on October the 7th, and here we are in March, and who's being vilified? And when you read about the atrocities, when you think that a 75-year-old woman would have her pelvis broken in the way that it was, right? And I'm not even going to repeat it, it's just too much. How can any cause be justified for acts like that? Do you ever see videos of IDF soldiers in the entire 70-odd years that Israel's been going, where Israelis have been dancing around, laughing as someone's been tortured in front of them? Ever. It isn't. Something has to be done about this. Someone has to stick up for what's right. Spencer, did you have your hand up?
No, just having a scratch.
And so, we are looking for tradespeople now, engineers, people who help with the rebuild. You can see the dilemma that they have. Do you rebuild the kibbutzes? Who's going to want to go back to their home after watching their sister or their brother being shot in front of them? It's not like, say, in New Zealand, somebody dies naturally in their flat and someone just takes it over. Or that, somebody, or even worse, somebody commits suicide, This is something on a different scale, How? And yet, if you don't rebuild, you're also giving in. And in amongst all this, the Gazans are God's creation too. Right? Now, those of you who are parents, what happens if 2 children start fighting one another and they're in danger of hurting one another? What do you do to them? You separate them and you calm them down, and then they might be able to re-establish their sibling relationships and not knock each other's heads off, right? That's what needs to happen on a nation scale, right? On hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, right? That's what you've got to do. This is what's happening, right? God loves them both, but he needs to separate them so that they don't hurt one another. And then you've got to start working on one or the other to work out what the misunderstanding was or what the thinking was that generated the conflict in the first place. That's what I do with my kids. Well, I think God would want to do the same, right? But you're dealing with nations. You're dealing with whole societies. And what are we like when we're in a group of people? We're not as rational as we are when we're individuals. You know, I've seen scientific papers that show that teenagers are just as rational as us older ones when they're driving a car when they're on their own. But something happens to us when we're in crowds. The madding crowd is what one book calls it. Hysteria happens. And so we've got to be careful of that. Yes, and that's why it creates a new dynamic when you're dealing with whole groups of peoples, right? And it's hard for us to think about these things because we're in a Western society where we think individually. It's hard for us to think that God might deal with us as a collective group, and we think that we're not guilty of certain things because we weren't part of it. But the Bible talks about it quite differently, doesn't he? Makes you think. If you're not a Christian and you've been listening to all this and you're thinking, oh, what's this? What's this? Well, I would point you back to the original values, but there's one thing, last thing I'd like to say to you. One of the things that we Christians believe is that we follow a living God who intervenes on both at a collective level and on an individual level to each one of us. If you don't know who God is, then when you leave this place and you're far from anywhere where you could be embarrassed by some other human being, go to an empty room. Close the door behind you. Sit down and say, there was this mad Chinaman who was talking to us today, and he said that you're out there and you're alive and you're here. God, if you're real, talk to me. And when he does, so first thing is wait honestly, right? Don't just go say that and then just wait a second and then run from the room. Wait honestly. When he talks to you, then you have something to think about. And that's the beginning of the journey that will take you on an adventure if you decide to take it, because there's no compulsion with God. He's not going to say to you, you join me or you're a pair of smoking shoes, right? He's not Hamas. He's not a Muslim jihadist. He will give you the choice, right? But if you decide to go, then I can tell you from my own life, he will take you on an adventure far, far greater than anything you could possibly imagine for yourself. It'll be far more tense. It'll be far more exciting. It'll take you through some very highs and some very lows. But you'll meet some amazing people along the way, and you will think to yourself, oh my goodness, when I look back, I've lived the life of Indiana Jones. It wasn't a boring life just going through life, building my career, buying a house, having some kids, looking back and saying, oh my goodness, I love those golf clubs. They're just so brilliantly clever, All right? It won't be. You will meet people like that. I have met people like that, right? It's taken me to Tiananmen Square. I was there just a few days before it happened, right? I have been there smuggling Bibles. I've filled a wedding suite with Bibles all the way up to the roof. And the underground Chinese guy said to me, oh my goodness, you've got to stop. Why? Oh, because the People's Security Bureau are just going to take this as an insult. There will be such a huge campaign of repression against the churches. We need you to stop bringing in Bibles. We just want you to just take them all over the country now, right? And along the way, I met people who were risking their lives, who were doing different things. I met a 21-year-old American, right, who's living in Nepal. And he met the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Nepal in Nepal, and being a Christian there and bringing Christian materials is illegal. And he was thinking about how he was going to do it. He met the minister in a bar, and the guy said to him, or in a restaurant rather, and he said to him, oh, where are you living? Oh, nowhere. Oh, why don't you come and live with me? And then when he got there, he found that his house had a huge basement. So he started having Bibles brought to the Minister of Foreign Affairs house and filled that up and started shifting that out to the underground churches in Nepal. Fantastic, isn't it? And you think to yourself, how can you meet such people? Only by following God. So Ephesians 2:10 is the basis for all that. Why? Because it says God is going to prepare you so that you can do the good works that he has prepared for you to do already, right? So that means life is a Hansel and Gretel game. You go through the forest, you find the breadcrumbs, and you do them. Each one is like a mission impossible task. You follow it, you do it, and then you look back at the trails and go, oh my goodness, there was a plan, you know? And you'll go, wow. And then Jeremiah 29 has been fulfilled in your life. You see what I'm getting at? And so this is the adventure that I'd encourage you all to go. And this is the adventure that I've been on and coming to New Zealand Friends of Israel, right? You probably don't know the story of that. I may as well tell you so I don't have to repeat it over and over. When I got married, I didn't realise that my family, the family I was marrying into, had Jewish blood, but they were Christians. And 3 weeks after our honeymoon, my mother-in-law says to me, oh, Tony, we're involved in this charity and we're having a meeting on Sunday. Would you like to support us? Being Chinese, I'm thinking, is there a choice? So I turn up. I look around, about 100 people there, all much older than me, and I'm going, oh, yeah. And I sit down at the back. And within about 30 seconds, I realised, oh, my goodness, it's an annual general meeting. Oh, this is going to be so boring. So my mind starts to drift. I start daydreaming. I'm daydreaming, you know, and daydreams, do you know how daydreams go? Eventually, they're going to elect officers. And so the guy at the front says, oh, we're opening for nominations for officers. My mother-in-law, who's sitting in the front row, says, President, I know just the man, Tony Khan. I go, and I'm still daydreaming. I still don't know what's going on. Next thing you know, there's clapping. People are standing up. And may Tony Khan please come forward. You know what happens when your name gets called like that? It's like being at school. The teacher's nobbled you. She knows that you've been daydreaming. She's going to ask me a question. What are they talking about? Who are these people? What do they do? I don't know. And then he's starting to walk up the middle like this, with his hand, with a big smile on his face, with his hand like this. And I'm going, oh, okay, so I'll walk forward. I shake his hand, and he goes, congratulations, Mr. President. I'm going, what the? And then he leads me by the hand up the front. I glance at my mother-in-law. She's got a grin as wide as from ear to ear. I think to myself, can I throw her under the bus? I think to myself, not if you want to stay married. So then you go, okay. So you go down the front. Mr. President, would you like to say a few words? I'm thinking, but who are these people? What do they do? So I may get up on the spot. Oh, I'm so honoured to be elected. I'm really looking forward to working with you. So that night, I take the Constitution home and I read it and I go, oh, this is about the Jewish people. Oh, so then I start reading about the Jewish people and I go, oh, they've been pushed from pillar to post for centuries, for thousands of years. Everyone's just kicked them in the guts whenever they've been on the ground. And then I thought, oh, well, I'm Chinese. I grew up in the Manawatu. I've grown up in Marston and in the Wairarapa as well. And I think I know a little bit about being an ethnic minority. I think we'll change this. Let's change the objectives to fighting racism and intolerance through raising awareness of Jewish history and culture. Actually, when you think about it, that's such a broad thing. It's like 007. You can do anything you like. Anyway, so that's what we did. So then next day, I rang up the Zionist Federation. I said, hey, you know, what can we do about bringing Holocaust survivors from all over the world, bring them to New Zealand? Let them talk to the next generations in high schools and stuff like that. And that's what we did. You know? And so I remember one time we took a Jewish couple to a school in Porirua, and most of them were Polynesians and Maoris, and the teachers were quite apologetic and said, look, this could be quite rambunctious. But as they told their story, total silence, penny could drop. And then the head boy stands up, totally unrehearsed, begins a haka. All the boys stand up, give a haka. They give it their all in honour of this couple. He sits down. Then the head girl stands up. She sings this waiata. You don't need to know what the words say, but you knew it was to the dead. It was mournful. It was so moving. I look at the Jewish couple. They're holding on to each other for dear life. Tears pouring down their face. I look back at the staff on the stage, none of them are standing anymore. The tears coming down their faces too. And then she finishes. It's a solo. None of the other girls stand up. She stops. Silence. And then I realise, oh, I'm supposed to be speaking next. And so I stood up and I said, look, all of you have seen all these pictures. They're black and white costume. They look like costume people. It's hard to relate. So many decades before you. But here, in this school, there are Tongans, there's Samoans, there's Fijians, there's Maori. What happens at morning tea break? What happens at lunchtime? Do you all break up into your groups? Are there people who are fashionable, people who aren't fashionable, people who wear the right clothes, people who don't, people who have got the right colour hair, people who do? You know, what's going to happen? That's where it starts, and this is where it finishes. You can nip it in the bud now. So that's a part of what we do. This is where it is. Sorry, that would sound like a shameless pitch, didn't it? But, you know, that's it. Thanks so much for coming. I know this is afternoon tea, and we've gone on for much, much longer than probably any of you expected. So I appreciate you coming. And for those online too, I thank you for your attention. And I hope you join us in the next steps. Thank you.